This is happiness, to be everything at once. Be unblinded, be unlearned, be unbridled and unburned.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of Mood Prep. My name is Dave Nixon, and I'm going to be continuing on from yesterday's episode. I spoke about the Enneagram. Now, the Enneagram is simply let me just make it simply. Technically, it's a psycho-spiritual model rather than just a personality type indicator, although they basically look at personality traits. Yesterday, I spoke about how personality is something that we do rather than something that we have. And one of the things that I don't think I did speak about yesterday, but I've definitely spoken about before, is the idea of the persona. The persona actually is, I believe, a Greek word that means mask. So the personas of the play is the masks that the people wore for the play, and personality is derived from that word. And so what we're looking at with our personalities is truly understanding why we do, not just what we do, but why we do behave in particular ways, especially based on stress or security. So the Enneagram is a fantastic developmental model for that. And for those of you that are curious about doing it, I've put a link into the Facebook group, Mood Prep Online, and you follow that. It takes you 40 minutes to do the test. I mean, you don't have to do the test, obviously. If you work with people that have been highly trained in this sort of stuff, they can probably actually work with you without having to do the test. Otherwise, that's just the easiest way. It's 40 minutes. It's like $14 or something, depending which currency you're using. Just get it done. It's really recommended. It's in the group. If you're curious, I get absolutely fucking zero kickbacks on it. It's not my test. It's just a perfect tool. It's a very good tool, not the perfect tool, for self-awareness and self-development. But we're going to start with type 1 today. We're going to go over the 9 types over the next 9 episodes. Today's the type 1, which is the reformer, or otherwise in other texts, it's known as the perfectionist. Now, we're going to go through each type. I'm going to break down the type as a general, and then what they usually like: healthy, average, and then unhealthy. Because there's 9 levels of healthiness. So the reformer is very interesting type, and it's one of the types that I probably have had not a crazy amount. I definitely couldn't relate to it. That's for sure. It's not one of my types that I would lean into. But I found it very challenging to relate to them in the first place. So the reformer is called the reformer or the perfectionist for the reason being is that they know how things should be. So the reformer knows that if something's not right, they should be the person that should reform it. And the reason being is because they often are very judgmental. Now, these sounds like some sort of negative traits, but they're not necessarily negative traits. It's just their ability to know right from wrong, which also gives them the power to often be either or black and white, which can sometimes work to their detriment, because it's like, well, it's either this or that, and it's like, well, that's not always the case, obviously. But at their healthiest, the reformer is actually very playful and witty, and can really hold the attention of a room. They can be quite charming, but in this natural, humble way, without having to tell anyone that they're humble, right? So that's the reformer at their healthiest. So really able to have this good sense of right and wrong, without that sense having them and telling them how to act and so forth. They're able to have this sort of lightness and playfulness to them rather than being sort of stuck in this seriousness. Whereas you get a reformer in an average level, and that's definitely where the perfectionist comes into play, because they start to really know how things should be, and they really want to make sure that they get things perfect. And one of their common traps is that they'll never be good enough. They'll never fall into the category that is good enough, which is often a motivational strategy for them, because it allows them to continually have this drive to learn more, to be able to become fitter, to do all these things, but they never feel fulfilled. So they succeed, they end up achieving a lot and obtaining a lot throughout their life, but they never feel fulfilled. And so they've got this drive, and it's often from childhood patterning, and that's one of the things I won't be going through in these podcasts, because it'd be different talking to an individual about it. But the often message that they had was this idea of, like, either with school grades or with sport, it's like, okay, well, you got second in a test, or you got second out of the best and fairest, runner-up. Why didn't you get first? And so what ends up happening is that they end up learning how to look for differences. So they often are a mismatcher, it's called, rather than a matcher. And so what they do is they start to look at the 1% they missed out on rather than the 99% that they got, and they base their worth on that extra 1%. So they value 100. They absolutely value 100% and almost don't put any value on 99%. It's like, and that's where the either or comes into play. And so what they know is that 100% is good, everything else is bad. It's not good enough. And so even if they did get 100%, they would probably look at something to find a way to make and mismatching is looking for differences, right? So they would look for ways to realize that they weren't still good enough, and how they'd have to go harder and faster and further and learn more and do more in order to be good enough. And they're constantly sort of looking for that external approval, and hence the perfectionist, which is interesting because perfectionists often die with their goals, because they get buried with their goals, because there's never a right time to start, right? It's not the right time to start a business, or it's not the right time to go to uni, or whatever the case might be. And so I have to do it perfect, and I just don't have enough time to do that, which is often a lot of pressure that they can put on themselves. So that's the type 1 as an average, right? The unhealthy, right? So the 9 levels, 1, 2, and 3 being the healthy. There you go. There's an F there now, apparently. 4, 5, 6 being the average, and the 7, 8, 9 being the unhealthy areas. That reformer there can be quite unreasonable. They can fall into this category. So what they actually do, they end up taking on the traits of an average 4, which is the individualist. So what that means is that they're going to go inside and really look at their emotions, and they become almost, even though they're wanting to find solutions, they just know they're never going to be good enough. So what's the fucking point in trying? So they can become very apathetic, and they can also become depressive. They become very reclusive, whereas the average type 1 can be a workaholic. These people become also workaholic, but to the detriment. They end up hating their work, but still trying to find some sort of satisfaction in it, whilst also hating not doing any work. So it's like they can't get a break from themselves no matter where they go, and they have this super ego voice in their head running, just reminding them how shit they are at everything they do, and they're never going to be good enough. And often this actually isn't even their voice. Often it's a voice from their parents, or at least one of their parents, that sort of was extremely critical of them, and they haven't broken up with that parent. And what that means by that is simply that, and I've seen this, I've read it in many books, I've studied this in like continual courses as well, and I've seen it in many people, and not just type 1s, it's across the types, but with type 1s they often still may have this tendency to look for a particular approval that they're probably never going to get. And so the issue is that then they don't want to then break up, because there's a whole bunch of not good enoughs going in that, and meanings and frames and stuff. So it's really quite fascinating. But either way, at their unhealthiest, that's when they really become depressive around the super ego voice and what it's telling them. And they really take on those average traits. Whereas, as I mentioned, at their healthiest, at their best, type 1s can really be the fantastic leaders of an organization. They don't take things so seriously, especially not themselves. They start to perfect the need to not be perfect, right? And they also start to really take on the good traits, I say the good traits, the healthy traits of the type 7, which is the enthusiast, which is a playful attitude. It does have this charisma about them. And type 1s are extremely intelligent, and they also have a deep level of emotional intelligence as well. A lot of the time they just lack the permission from themselves to go there, because they think that if they're not serious, then they're not going to get taken seriously. Whereas often when we get too serious, we often get ignored, because people are like, fuck being around that person. So either way, so that's the reformer or the perfectionist, looking at the 3 different sort of levels between healthy, average, and unhealthy. The path of development for these guys is to really see and recognize whenever they're putting pressure on themselves, and especially the people around them. From there, it's really about understanding and starting to hear themselves around their shoulds, starting to hear the judgment. And it's not about ignoring or repressing or, trying to get rid of the judgment or shaming the judgment, because a lot of the time that's just judging the judgment, right? So the judgment comes up, I fucking shouldn't do that. I just try and ignore it. It's like, that's judging the judgment. just recognize the judgment. It's a pattern that you run really well and it served you for some time. And it's about actually integrating that and going, okay, I hear that. I'm just going to park that and listen to the person for what they're all going to say with everything rather than judging them halfway through or thinking they're an idiot or whatever the case might be. Because one's, although they're not probably the angriest, the eights have the access to external anger. Ones will often initially get angry at someone else, but then they turn that anger in on themselves and be like, I fucking shouldn't have let them treat me like that. I shouldn't have fell for that again. What's wrong with me? And that's where their anger comes in, and it becomes this real super ego voice of judgment, which once again isn't their voice. So the path of development is to really lean into the infallible part of you, the part, because we're all infallible, we can't be perfect. That's the beauty of being human. And the more that we can do that, especially these beautiful, intelligent type ones, the more we can do that, the lighter that we can take ourselves and life, the more fun they end up having, but also the funner they're more around. And funnily enough, one of the things that's really important to them is making change in the world. When they move towards becoming a bit lighter, that's actually when they make the most change, rather than having too much pressure on themselves and trying to be too rigid. Funny that, hey. On that note, team, I've got a little over 11 minutes, so we're going to finish up there. Thank you very much for listening in. If you found this podcast beneficial, or if you think you might know a type 1, it would mean the world to me if you would pass it on to someone else that you think would also find this beneficial. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this in the group on Facebook, so search Mood Prep Online. Let me know your thoughts on the type 1 as well. Otherwise, team, I'm out. Until tomorrow, peace and pizza. Kick today in the dick. Slay the dragon. I'll see you soon.
Is happiness to be everything at once, be unblinded, be unlearned, be unbridled and unburned.